Europe clearly does not want to go it alone. Europe wants a liberal democratic West, but without the heft of the United States, it's going to be tough going.
This is The Rip Current. I'm Jake Ward. This podcast is about the invisible forces that have us in their grasp. We each week have guests on that talk to us about everything from business to tech to politics and the ways in which it is invisibly shaping us and in some cases sweeping us right out to sea. This week I'm talking to the former president of Estonia, Toomas Ilves. He was the head of Estonia from 2006 until 2016. And in that time, he engineered a miraculous change that turned that country from one that was really suffering after it emerged from Soviet control into today one of the top and most technologically sophisticated liberal democracies in the world. You will be astounded at what it is possible to do just on your phone in that country, and the ways in which the trickle-down effects have included things like making it one of the least corrupt democracies in the world and one of the friendliest to press freedoms. It is a truly inspiring story speaking to him, but he, of course, also has some pretty dark thoughts about what's coming now that President Trump seems to be cozying up to the president of Russia and getting involved in somehow making an enemy of Europe after nearly 100 years of alliance. All of that is coming up on The Rip Current. I hope you enjoy this hour-long conversation with Toomas Ilves. Toomas Ilves, thank you so much for being here on The Rip Current.
It's great. Great to see you again.
I want to start with just defining. I just think you should give us a little primer on Estonia because, people may have the vaguest sense of kind of where it is, what it is, that it was once a Soviet holding, but give us a little background on it. Tell us a little bit about your nation.
Well, today it's the most digital country in the world, but what are we? We're up there in Northeast Europe, right below Finland. We're linguistically closely related to Finnish. The languages are very similar. And as I wrote in my program notes here, when it says preferred pronouns, I said it and its because we don't have any gender in our language.
Oh, wow. At all? You don't have gender at all?
No gender, which does not make, I would say, just as a mild comment, does not make Estonian society any less sexist.
Oh, that's too bad. I thought you'd solved it. I was like, man, that place is amazing. So the national character, I'm curious. So clearly, right, the Soviet holding of Estonia is an enormous part of its background.
Well,
and I'm curious what I want to talk to people so they understand what this dramatic transition was that went where you went from being a Soviet.
Right. Well, you have to understand that along with all of the rest of Eastern Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, after World War I mean, basically all of these countries were created. They had not been there before. Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, which had disappeared for 150 years, Czechoslovakia at the time, which had never been anything. It was always all these countries were always ruled by someone else. So these countries emerged in 1917, 18, 20. And so Estonia was an independent country from 1918 till 1940, when we were occupied as a result of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, or the Nazi sort of Soviet Pact, or the whatever you want to call it, the Hitler-Stalin Pact. And so we were then occupied by the Soviets, then we're occupied by the Nazis, then we're reoccupied by the Soviets. It was not a great history, but... And then we were under Soviet rule from 1944 until 1991.
The wall comes down, and along with many other dominoes, yours falls.
Right. Well, in 1938, which was the last full year before World War II, the GDP per capita of Estonia, according to the Cambridge Economic History of Europe, was slightly higher than the than the GDP per capita of Finland. So we were a tiny, I mean, you wouldn't probably notice in the streets, but we were a tiny bit richer, right? In 1992, which is the first full year after reestablishment of independence, the GDP per capita of Finland was 8 times the GDP per capita of Estonia. I mean,
So Soviet control crushed the GDP
yeah,
of your
or
country.
it just didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, right.
And that becomes important when it comes to digitization. But we can get to that later.
Well, and then and your family escaped Estonia to the United States
Well,
when?
my parents were kids, basically,
Right.
teenagers, and they went to they independently of each other went to Sweden, where there were some 30,000 Estonians, and they got married, and then they had me, and then my father got hired in the U.S. because he was an engineer, so there was lack of engineers. So in 1957, I came over to New Jersey, which has remained my spiritual home ever since then.
This is the thing, you guys. When you listen to the former president of Estonia and you think to yourself, wait a minute, why does he seem like a guy who'd be so comfortable folding a piece of pizza in half? It's because he spent his
Well,
childhood
I,
doing
I
that.
must
You're
admit,
that guy.
I worked very hard to get rid of the Tony Soprano accent that I had. When I used to talk like this with the dentalized T's,
You were
right?
that guy,
Because
really? You had that accent for years.
yeah. Well, then what happened was when I was in college, um, I had a professor who doubted I had written a paper, and then so he called me in, and
Because of your
then
accent. Clearly, a guy with your background would
well, I'll
not
get
have
there.
been able to write this paper.
I'm
Oh,
just
sorry.
explaining. I mean, it
Oh, I'm
was
sorry. I'm sorry.
something in
I'm just excited.
philosophy. I don't remember, but anyway, I'd written a paper. He's like, "Well, this is like really a great paper," but so he sort of basically quizzed me and interviewed me. I mean, on the paper that I had written, and then he realized that I had in fact written it, and then he said, "Elvis, you're a lot smarter than you sound." Or actually, what he said was, "You're not as dumb as you sound."
Oh, wow.
At which point I said,
tough.
"I think I'm going to work on my accent to
Wow.
be
And so
taken
you actually,
seriously."
you took elocution or
No, I
something and
didn't.
somehow
I mean, I have an ear for,
you just started to work around it, which is amazing because you're a guy you speak what, 5 languages. And so that's
to
amazing that
varying
you had to,
degrees, right? But I
yeah,
mean,
yeah, but you had to
I
shake
was
it off.
already, I mean, my first language was obviously Estonian. I spoke a little Swedish, but I lost that. I spoke fluent Spanish because I just liked Spanish. And then I spoke obviously English. And so,
And so being a kid growing up in New Jersey, was the expectation that was the family expectation that you would go back to Estonia someday, or did you develop that on your
well,
own?
I guess my parents had that expectation right after World War II. But that didn't. I mean, the Cold War came on. It was hopeless. So I mean, they had given up. And my whole attachment to Estonia was largely cultural. That is, I really liked Estonian literature, which I found much more interesting than. I mean, contemporary Estonian literature I found much more interesting than the contemporary sort of 1970s literature of the United States, with the exception of
It like
Thomas
spoke to
Pynchon. But
it spoke to some lost part of you. That's interesting.
oh, it was dealing with much more interesting issues, such as the loss of the language. What happens when a culture loses. It's not uniquely Estonian. I mean, if you read Milan Kundera, he talks about this in a number of his books and his essays. He talks about the loss of a culture under Soviet domination. He
Right.
brings example how a cafe that had always been a cafe, I don't know, some local cafe suddenly is called the Cafe Moscow, and how, and in fact, it was quite surprising. It turns out that Czech intellectuals called the process of destruction of a culture by the Soviets, Estonizace, which would be in Czech. In English, it means Estoniazation,
Huh.
which means
Wow.
like,
You guys are the benchmark
yeah,
for
sort of. And
being
so much of
crushed.
Estonian literature is precisely about
Hmm.
the loss of the culture and the language. And so anyway, so I
Well,
mean, I
this
just
is,
found that much more interesting, the kind of the
yeah,
angst of your average American poet.
right. And so when do you go back? I mean, you worked as a journalist, you were a diplomat. As I
Well,
understand it, you were the leader of
well,
of a political party. Like when did
well,
you go back and start this new
I
life?
went back much later. I mean, what happened was because I had written about Estonia and stuff, political stuff, and sort of analysis. I was recruited by Radio Free Europe in 1984 to work in their research and analysis department as a research analyst, which I did for 4 years, and then they asked me if I would become the head of the Estonian service, which was the broadcast end of things. I mean, it's very topical right now because the U.S. has decided to shut it all down,
Yeah, that's all getting shuttered. That's right.
and a lot of people right now here. I mean, they've been working for RFERL on work permits, get living permits, and so what when you shut down, you lose your permit to live here. When you get sent back to Russia, sent back to Belarus, I mean, these people get put in jail there.
Hmm. Hmm.
Anyhow, so I was there, and then during the late '80s, since I sort of was knew the language and the culture, I got to know a bunch of people in sort of the cultural intelligentsia, which was also turned into the political intelligentsia. I had gone there in 1984 just to see what it was like before I went to work for RFE. But anyway, so I mean, I knew them, and then basically what happened after Estonia became independent, and after we had our first genuine democratic elections, the new president started giving me a hard time. He said, you're sitting there, you're living this wonderful life with a high salary. I was living in West Germany.
Hmm.
And here we are, right? I mean, so why don't come and do something instead of
Hmm.
sort of hanging out there?
Duty calls.
And so I went. And then,
Hmm.
so what they, after a brief time, they decided that they would make me the first post war ambassador to Washington.
Makes sense.
So
Kid from America.
I had
You know the
U.S.
language.
citizenship at the time, but
Sure.
then I gave it
Right.
up. And then I was in Washington and living. We were like the country was really poor, as I mentioned. That was then when I conceived of I had this idea we need to digitize, which I can talk about.
Well, so
And then I was
let's
there
talk about
for
the.
like till
Yeah.
1996, and then there was some government problem, and then the president called me up and said, "I want you to be foreign minister." So I was foreign minister for altogether 6 years. The foreign minister, I said, I would only come if you give me a free hand to take us into the European Union, which was not the general understanding in my country that we should go in the European Union, but I had figured out from my time in Washington and talking to lots of people that the only way we would ever get into the European Union would be, I mean, rather, the only way we'd ever get into NATO was if we were in the European Union, because then the
Hmm.
countries that were against us to get into NATO, Germany, Italy, France, UK at the time was a member, they would veto us for going into NATO. But if once you're in the EU, you can't really veto
Hmm.
another EU member. So I said we got to go there. So that was my little strategic insight.
This transition that you were there for, I remember. So you and I know each other from having been fellows together at the Stanford program called the Center for Advanced Study in the Behavioral Sciences. And I remember when we were there together, you describing to me how stark the contrast was between the sophistication and ambition of Estonian people, and that how that got to be how that got to blossom all of a sudden after Soviet control went
Right.
away versus what it had been like before. And I remember you describing to me something about the person who wrote the Constitution, what that guy had been doing even a year prior?
Prime author, well, I mean, the people who wrote the Constitution, there are several, but I mean, one had been sort of, I mean, he had been a dissident who had been sort of shoveling coal into furnaces because he was,
Literally did that job.
yeah,
Was a guy who he was a stoker,
right.
and then he winds up writing the Constitution
Well,
because
I mean, he
he's
was a
that
brilliant
guy.
legal scholar. It's just that he,
Right.
and then another one of them, which was sort of typical of Estonians, was the other primary author was a person who arrested by the Nazis, sent to a concentration camp in Germany, Stutthof. Then, when the Sovs came and liberated him, they already knew who he was. I mean, because he had been arrested. He was arrested because he was trying to work on Estonia. I mean, I don't know, sort of an anti. He was a sort of anti-Nazi, but as an Estonian sort of.
Right. He's on the troublemaker list.
Right.
Sure.
So they kept him there for
Wow.
another 3 years in the same concentration camp.
Wow.
But he was another sort of really well-known legal scholar. So it was we had these, and they drew up a constitution, the sort of classic parliamentary democracy. With a prime minister and a parliament, and if you don't like the prime minister, he gets canned. Yeah,
But that transition is so amazing to me, right? That you've got this, like, there's no clearer argument to me that the Soviet system was holding brilliant people in stasis, freezing them in place,
yeah.
than what you describe there. That it can't be a merit. I mean, you had always said it can't really be a meritocracy under that era of Soviet control. It was an ice age.
Well, not that I would want to draw any parallels, but
Hit me. Go for it.
But I mean, if you keep seeing really incompetent people who have no understanding of what they're doing put into high positions of power simply because they're, in the party, as it were, and friends of the top person, well, you end up with the same kind of thing. And
This is what you get. That's exactly right. When we come back, we're going to talk about Toomas Ilves's personal odyssey of working to turn this country that had been held in place by Soviet control into the digitally sophisticated democracy that it is today. We'll be right back. You became president in 2006, but you had already been working on trying to modernize Estonia, bring it into the digital age. Tell us about this. What was your ambition and how did you do it?
Well, I had no ambition. It was more that, as I mentioned, Estonia is really poor. And I was this ambassador in Washington, and sometimes we wouldn't get money to even pay the rent, and we're living on credit cards and stuff. And everything looked really dire because we were so poor, right? I mean, okay, we were independent, but the GDP per capita was $2,800 a year nominal. I mean,
a year. Wow. So, and what does that look like in life? How does that reflect itself in like street life, village life, city life?
Well, first of all, everyone's very poor. Clothes are ragged and old, and cars are old Soviet cars, and nothing has been fixed, and the buildings are all dilapidated. So I was sitting there going, well, what are we going to do? I mean, and so it was that statistic that, the point is, so you look at Estonia, where Estonia was, it's independent, and then you look at the West. And you realize the West has had 50 years to do all this, highways, new hospitals, whatever. Everything has been built for 50 years, and you're there, and like you're in 1944, right? And so what I thought was, well, there's got to be something where we can be at least on a level playing field. And so the background to this was that since I grew up in New Jersey in this little town, I became a geek. I became a geek because I had a math teacher who was doing her PhD in math education at Teachers College, Columbia. And so she did this little experiment, which was her issue. This is 1971. She goes, "Can we teach kids to code or to program?" So she had, it was like a year-long experiment. She rented a teletype with a perfo tape in it, and this big telephone modem. You stick your phone receiver into it, and then it was connected to a mainframe computer 30 miles away. And we learned BASIC. It was so new. BASIC had just come out the year earlier. So there we were. We all learned BASIC. This is great. This is no big
Right.
deal. This is kind of fun. But and so there were 11 of us, all of whom I think, except for me, are millionaires now, in tech millionaires. But that's a different matter.
Right.
Anyway,
Back then,
so
they're making like karate games and saying, go to 10, run 20.
that's what
That's
we
right.
were. Yes,
Yeah.
but at the time, it was nothing except I mean, when I went to college, I saw a little 3x5 ad looking for a programmer for the psych department, and when it turned out I had to, it was the first lab computer that you could buy. It was a PDP-8. PDP-8. It was called PDP-8 because it had 8K of memory, which is less than an empty email. I bought my first Apple IIe in 1983 just because, well. And then a friend of mine from Radio Free Europe, who knew I was kind of geeky, said he had gone off too after the fall of the wall, and he sent me an email saying, "You might be interested. This is kind of a cool thing." And what it was, he was a professor at the University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana, and Mark Andreessen was a graduate student there. And he had just come out with Mosaic, the first web browser ever. Now,
Right.
unlike
The
today,
first visual interface, really, for this kind of
I
thing.
had to go to Radio Shack and I bought this big cardboard thing with 7 floppy disks in it for like $29.95 or whatever it was then. And I uploaded the floppies and then open it up and I go, wow, this is it. This is it. This is the one thing where no one's ahead of us. No one's behind. I mean, we're
Right.
at the cutting. We are where. I mean, if you do this, then you are exactly where the world is today.
It doesn't matter that we're driving old, crumbling Lada cars and that the timber's all dilapidated, because we can use technology to catch up.
Right, and of course, it helps that we had Finland up to the north, which had Nokia. So that was like kind of, so there was this like understanding in the population that tech is kind of cool. And so then I proposed, I figured also this is never going to fly with older people. So I said, okay, the key to this is that we put all the schools online and give them computer labs.
Hmm.
And now this is where like Estonia at that time comes in. It was, since we were starting up, we had done all these reforms that were like kind of unheard of. And so there was this willingness to do new stuff among the people who were in government. And so the government, I proposed that, well, let's digitize schools. And I said, okay, what we do is if you want really to work, you just don't buy computers for them, but they have to, municipality has to pay for half. So it's got skin in the game. Initially there were a couple of schools. And then, of course, that great motivator envy kicked in because it was like we have a local government. It's basically local governments. Local government has a math teacher who convinces the board of ed that we should spend money on getting a computer room in the school. And so they would, and then all of the municipalities around there, they would say, why do they have that? And so that meant that by 1997, 98, all Estonian schools had computer labs and were connected. And the idea was that, okay, we didn't have enough teachers, but these kids are going to learn it by themselves. You put a kid behind a computer and it's just going to take off. So
Do you think that is there something psychologically now? Because, obviously anybody listening to this is going to think, okay, wow, this is like a path forward. Like this could be a thing, and I wonder if you think there was something specific psychologically going on in that this was a newly liberated intellectual class? Was there like a motivation, a self-starting kind of psychology
Yeah,
that maybe
it
was
was
unique to the
there.
moment?
That was very much there. I mean, this is because this was something cool and Western that Estonians could do, that Estonian kids could do, right? I mean,
Hmm.
and it
After
had,
being prohibited, I'm sure, from learning anything other than the party line.
well, they didn't have computers. I mean, they didn't have,
Sure.
they
Right.
didn't have PCs. That's it.
Right.
So then what happened was that the government got serious about using digital technology to develop public services. So the government did a whole bunch of things in the late '90s, early 2000s. They issued everyone an ID card with a chip on it,
Hmm.
which then allowed you to do two things. One is it's a unique identity. I mean, it's everyone has a unique identity, and it was end to end encrypted,
Hmm.
which meant you
And
could
this is what year? How
2000.
That's amazing. That is very early. I remember around that time traveling to Europe with my magnetic stripe credit card and being in some cafe in France or something and trying to pay for a
No,
drink
no,
or
this
something
is
with it.
way
And the
ahead of
guy
it.
said, no, 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 we don't use those kinds of cards. He was so he was
Yeah,
so
but that's the
like
magnetic. We're talking about a chip, right?
right. You guys were so far ahead. That is very sophisticated stuff in the year 2000.
And what we then did was then, I mean, one of the things that was key in this was that the banks were really into it because they
Mm,
wanted to do online banking, but secure online banking,
right.
and
Right.
which you
I'm
can
sure
do.
that it was like a cash world when the Soviets
Yeah, it
split. I
was.
can't
Oh,
imagine
absolutely.
banking was very
Only, yeah.
sophisticated. Sure.
So you have two-factor authentication, end-to-end encryption with a unique identity. That's all you need, right? And so, well, we started developing services. Where we started off was taxes, which is everyone hates taxes, right? So we made it so it's really easy to do your taxes. I mean, it
Yeah.
takes
So
you,
tell this is the one that's going to blow an American's mind. Tell us today what is it like today to do your taxes in Estonia?
well, since for 25 years. I mean, I got log on. It's me. There's listed all my income. If
Because
you
they have
have
it already. You don't
right,
have to turn in all of the stuff. They've got
no,
it
you don't
already.
have to turn anything because everything, I mean, if you work for a company, work for the government, whoever you work for is obligated to report what you made. And of course, then, and whenever if you make make a charitable donation, of course, the charity reports we got this much money from this guy. So everything that you've done that is either in terms of income or sort of charity or sort of, you know, whatever 501k company, whatever they call it in the
Yeah. Sure.
U.S.
Sure. Sure. Right.
I mean, whatever it is. No, it's not 501k, but it's
But
whatever.
any money that has exchanged hands has been recorded in some form.
Right. Um, and so it took off from there, and pretty soon we were the first country to have digital prescriptions. So that was like,
Well, so wait, but just to close this off, so paying taxes today, if I understand it correctly, you can do it in like a couple minutes
yeah,
on your
I
phone or
just
on a
did
browser.
mine the last minute the other day because I
And
forgot. And as I go in there and I just say, "Do you accept?" And then, oh, they say, "Do," and so I have a refund, but I also have I have a car tax and I have real estate, well, not real estate, I mean, whatever, property tax.
yeah,
So since I was supposed to get a refund, but it says, do you agree to have your refund, part of your refund, pay your car tax
right.
and your property tax, and so that means just one less thing I have to do. I say yes.
How long would you say it took you to file your taxes?
2 minutes.
2 minutes, 120 seconds to bang out your federal taxes in all forms
Yeah,
in Estonia. Yep,
yeah, but
that's what
that's
it's
because
like in
it's
America.
so digitized. Now, one of the
Right.
things that this comes out of this is when you have such a digitized society, you also have a dramatic decrease in corruption
Why is that?
because, well, I mean, it's hard to do things with cash. I mean, well, I mean, a
Right.
typical thing that in the commie lands and especially, but all over, I mean, that's a form of, sort of corruption. Is, I mean, as an example, is speeding tickets.
Hmm.
So, guy catches you and goes, well, you're speeding. And say slip him a five, right? Doesn't You don't have to pay the big thing, but you can't do that in Estonia because your speeding ticket only counts if it's recorded on a radar with a picture of the license plate and all that stuff. So you can't get, you can't bribe the cop. But I mean, where the corruption is very low is in all aspects of what is called petit corruption or petty corruption. I mean, the classical things which in order to get something from that you're entitled to. I mean, like, you want to see a doctor, or you want to get a permit to dig a hole or something. You go to the bureaucracy, and then say, well, I mean, it's going to take you 6 months, but and then you say, well, here, take some money and
And we'll move this along for you.
right. All of that, I mean, disappears because I mean, we've gotten to the point already for like at least 10 years where basically there's nothing well, as of last year, there is nothing you can, in your interaction with the state or the government, that you cannot do online. The last thing that went was you can now get divorced online.
Huh. Wow. You can do that just as easily as your taxes.
Well, it's not easy, but you can
Probably
do
not
it
as
with
easy,
that.
but
I mean, you don't have to go
it's
face it.
digitized. Wow. 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 I hadn't even thought about that. That makes perfect sense, of course, that you would, if there's an ongoing record of every financial transaction or anything else that's going on, then people are less likely to get into skullduggery that they want to keep hidden. That makes a lot of
Now, the
sense.
key
Right.
to this working as opposed to Doge
Yeah, right.
is that we spent lots of time compartmentalizing everything, but not just compartmentalizing, but regulating who gets to see what.
When we come back, we're going to talk about how the Estonian structure might tell us a little bit about how we could avoid corruption in this country. Stay with us. Okay, so you begin compartmentalizing the different agencies in Estonia and keeping them separate.
It's more than that.
Yeah, tell me,
The
how does
way
this
to
work?
think about it is this: it's a huge Christmas tree. And my health records are a little Christmas tree ball here. Your health records a Christmas tree ball over there. So those are health records. They're tied to me. And over here are my bank accounts. Or here are my traffic tickets. Your traffic tickets are over there. Now, that means that you cannot get a database where you get everything. So I can access my say health records. I can access my bank records. I can access whatever it is that I want to access that is tied to me. I can get. Now, only my doctor is authorized to see my medical records. No one else can see my medical records unless they're authorized by me. So that means that the police can't see it. No one. I mean, you have to have permission to see it, and so that was the hard part. The technical stuff is easy, but actually figuring out what are all the firewalls, and so. I mean, I'll give you an example. People say, "Oh, we don't want to digitize because it reduces privacy." Well, the example I bring is Michael Schumacher, who was the racing car driver.
Oh, yeah, Michael Schumacher. Yeah, sure.
What happened to him was he had this horrible skiing accident. I mean, he's never raced again. And but he's like such a big, sort of figure, within hours of his accident, The largest yellow newspaper, Bild in Germany, had, his skull X-rays and all this stuff.
Hmm.
That could never happen with us because we know exactly who accesses the records. Whereas if a paper record, someone can go in there, sort of make a quick photocopy, put the X-ray back, send it off the, photocopy. You can't do that. So that's where we've, and the thing that really makes it good, work well, is we have what I call it mutual reciprocal transparency.
Hmm.
So, I mean, all my property records are public. Everybody's public. Property records are public.
Right.
And when I was in office, or if you're a politician, people go in there, what does he own, right? What does he own? I mean, typical. I mean, it's what journalists do,
Sure.
right?
Sure.
The thing is, and then what surprised people in the beginning was, but I can see who accessed my property records
Oh, interesting. Right. So
because,
you can't be anonymously digging around.
right.
And so in order for you to, that's interesting. So the social contract is I'll show you
If you,
what,
I'll show you mine if you show me
but
yours.
you gotta be, yeah, you gotta put your name behind it. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So that means that I mean, if no one really cares at this point about what I own, but I mean, but you can't. I mean, the public stuff, the public records, which like property or whatever, marital status, all that. That's public data is public data, but you know who's looking at it. So I mean,
That
I
is
sort of
interesting.
when first time this happened, I saw this journalist, and I saw the journalist a couple of days later, and I said, "No, I saw you snooping around my property records. Anything interesting?" He's like, "How do you know?" I go, "Don't you know that when you go in to look at me,
Hmm.
I see that you went in to see me?" But what happened
Couldn't
was
you
really
couldn't you make the argument that that would have some sort of chilling effect on
it's
the
public
flow of
data.
information in a
It's
free
public.
society?
It's public data.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, why should you be? If my data are public, why should you be anonymous?
That's interesting. I mean, I think the argument, and again, I'm just playing devil's advocate here, but the argument would be, well, because then I, as a journalist, might have you, as the president, come back at me, right? That there's some
Um,
reprisal.
the just today, um, RSF, Rapporteur Sans Frontières, declared
Hmm.
Estonia the number 2 country in the world in press freedom.
So that was not the effect. Reprisal,
No,
oppression
no, I mean number
was not
two,
the effect.
and I should point out that most of Europe is like the only country ahead of us is Norway, but all the rest of Europe's behind us. But sort of being in the top 20,
Yeah,
and
right.
The United States in terms of press freedom is number 57
And
between
falling.
between Sierra Leone and Gabon. Where
Sure,
it
sure, sure.
really took off was that there were these 4 guys, kids, I think of them because they were in their early 20s, um, narrowly avoided going to jail in the United States for inventing something called Kazaa, which was file swapping,
Hmm.
file sharing music program
Yep,
like
I remember that.
Napster. There were 2 of them, Kazaa and Napster. Anyway, they got out of that barely. Otherwise, the FBI was after it. But anyway, since what the principle of what they had used, which they had invented, really is a static form of the voice over internet protocol. I mean, that's really simplifying. Sorry, but they knew how to do
Sure.
this stuff, right? So I mean, it
Yeah,
is really like instead of swapping files, we're talking
yeah.
right now using a voice over internet protocol. And so they were picked up by the Swede, Nicholas Sandstrom, who said, "Oh, I'm going to hire you." And they sort of developed this. And then he came out with Skype in
Hmm.
2003.
Hmm.
Now, the effect of this, well, first of all, it was like, I mean, up till Skype came out, long distance phone calls. I mean, all this like expensive, hard to get, blah, blah, blah. And it took off like in a month, right? Suddenly everyone was download a Skype and you could call for free anywhere in the world. And that was great, right? And what the effect locally was that suddenly people said, "You mean these 22-year-old guys invented a worldwide brand here in this little country where it's cold and dark 3/4 of the year, and if it's not cold and dark, it's raining." And sort of, and suddenly our guys created a worldwide brand, and what that had, this amazing galvanizing impact of kids start saying, "Ooh, maybe this math stuff isn't so bad." And which led to lots and lots of startups starting up. And this was where, when my last year in office, I sort of saw the effect. Because I would always visit startups, and we do have per capita more startups than anybody, or did at least a couple of years ago. But I would go there and I started asking them, "So how'd you get into this? I mean, why are you here? It is, it's 2016. You're like 33 years old. You're working on this app or something." And I would say 80% of the time they said, "Oh, I was a kid in your program 20 years ago." They did exactly what I thought they would do, is that they would get there. They had a math teacher who didn't really understand it, but they say, "Okay." And then they would start playing around, and some percentage of them would probably break the computer, doing things they shouldn't do, but they will learn, and they did. And so we ended up with lots and lots of companies, and we are, per capita, we are number one in number of unicorns. That is
Billion-dollar companies.
Yeah. So we have
Wow.
10 of them for this very small country. So basically, we have a unicorn for every 130,000 people.
Because there's only what, 1.3, 1.4 million people in Estonia.
Yeah. So we don't have a lot of people, but
Man,
so
that's incredible. When we come back, I want to talk about how a person with this background sees the current political moment here in the United States, the rise of Putin, and how all of the stuff that he worked so hard to build may be under threat. We'll be right back.
those are the two things that I'm proud of in my life. One was getting my country into the EU against all odds. I mean, that was really, at that time, it's against all odds. And then this kind of weird digitization thing.
Given the victories that you had in your public life in Estonia, I have to assume there's a real contrast between what you thought of, and how an Estonian back then might have thought of the United States as this kind of world leader and a thing to hope for, and all these things.
I mean, basically,
versus today, what's the contrast like?
Well, I mean, for people under communist rule, it's no joke. It was the shining city on a hill.
The United States was.
Yes, liberal democracy was, the thing, and no one was as good at it as the United States. And on top of that, was powerful. So, I mean, this was like, right. I mean, and the U.S. defended liberal democracy. And so, and what makes it hard for me personally is that, I was probably a bigger fan. I mean, this is typical, right? I mean, as a child of refugees, you value the freedoms of the United States far more than people who just grow up and take them for granted. Because, I mean, people like, what do you mean mass deportations?
Right. Unimaginable to a modern day American, and yet.
Or people my age, when I was much younger, I mean, my age being arrested for what they said. I mean, what? I mean, here in the U.S. And so, I mean, I think I'm far more of a fan of the United States than most Americans, because you just take it for granted. Far more than Western Europeans, I thought. I mean, but Eastern Europeans, you talk to a Pole or a Czech or Estonian, I mean, they really sort of hold the U.S. In high esteem. Yeah. My whole goal was to get Estonia to be an open liberal society. Liberal in the sort of classic European sense. I'm not politically left or right, but I mean, free and fair elections, respect for human rights, whatever. I mean, rule of law. I mean, all that stuff that Americans would always come and say, that's what you need. That's what you need. I mean, that wasn't really I mean, that was the sort of main message of the United States throughout the 1990s to all of these countries was, freedom of speech, rule of law. I mean, all this, we're like, sir. And so it was deeply ingrained in us. And again, for me, having just because of my own sort of at least bent in high school. I mean, so I read John Locke and Montesquieu and separation of powers and all this stuff. And always stressed how important it was to have those fundamental rights and freedoms in my country. And, I did I pushed through, ending the death penalty when I was there. I mean, all this stuff that I did. When I was president, did the first step of what I think is a big step was getting through a civil partnership law so that gay people could at least have legal thing. And then they sort of round two then took place 2 years ago when Estonia was the only former communist country to actually legalize gay marriage. So I mean,
Right.
it's so we're very, I mean, we're not in the mainstream anymore. The U.S. mainstream, right? It's we're not.
Well, this is my question. I mean, are you someone who, by virtue of your where you come from and your family's experience, are you someone that thinks of liberal democracy and human rights and all that stuff as the natural, the arc of history, right? Does the arc of history, in your view, bend toward that kind of justice, or do we not know which way it bends? And right now, any
Well,
assumptions we had are
we
being
don't
sorely
know.
tested.
We don't know how it's going to go. I mean, one of the influential books in my life, whose title was completely misunderstood, is The End of History, in which Fukuyama, I mean, he talks about end as teleology, the goal of history.
What history wants.
I mean,
Yeah, right.
but the whole idea is this is where people are going naturally, and the history of human beings has been ever greater liberation from tyrannical rule, and so.
And do you believe that to be true?
Well, I think that's what as soon as you lose it, that's what people want. You take it for granted, but when you lose it, you go, oh boy.
Right. You want it back. That's interesting. So maybe that's part of the gravitational pull toward that.
Right.
Maybe that's why the arc of history could bend that way, is because we want it
Well,
naturally.
you don't miss your water until your well runs dry.
Yeah,
I
right.
think the bird sang something like
Right,
that.
right, right. So for you, watching Trump now in his second term, blowing up some of the relationship that the United States, if not most of the relationship the United States have with the rest of the world, being this weird diplomatic friend to Putin, just acting contrary to the history of the U.S., at least in Europe's experience all this time. I mean, what is that like for you?
Well, I mean, frankly, it's the something that we could call Pax Americana. Basically, the United States set the course for a liberal democratic world already beginning in 1944, when it set up the Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank, the IMF, and the General Agreement on tariffs and taxes, realizing that the big mistake after World War I was that it let the economies collapse. So that was the first thing. 1945, the fundamental sort of principle, I mean, they set up the UN, the US did that. 1945, the principle that you cannot change borders through use of force or even threat of use of force, which is in the Charter of the UN. The fundamental principle of post 1945 life. On top of that, then you had the Marshall Plan. You had, which basically got at least Western Europe going. When the the U.S., I mean, is showing how much it was willing to defend liberty. It was the Berlin airlift, right? And then you had the socialist foreign minister of the UK, Bevan. I mean, I emphasize socialist, very left-wing guy. Noticing that in Eastern Europe, in Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia at the time, you had 1948, you had all these coups by the communists. And, worst case was in Czechoslovakia, where they threw the democratically elected government out the window. It's the defenestration, the second defenestration in Prague. The first one was when the Jan Hus and the Protestants in like 1400 got defenestrated in Prague. Anyway, he wrote this letter to Truman and said, "Look, we're all under. Can we do something?" So they created. That's how you got NATO. And then, with considerable U.S. Encouragement, especially because the Europeans were like getting not so nice to each other anymore, they came out. I mean, Robert Schuman basically said, okay, we need a European Union. And originally it was called the Coal and Steel Community, became the European Economic Community, basically reducing tariffs and trade barriers. And it's grown, through the decades to what it is today, which is almost a state, but not quite. With a foreign policy, with all kinds of, common trade policy, all these things. And all of this is a creation of the United States.
Right.
And now, U.S. is, which had always pushed for trade, free trade. I mean, even before World War II. I mean, the U.S. has been sort of like the free trade country all along.
Right.
Not backed off that. It has always taken a harsh position on authoritarians, always promoted democracy. Rule of law has always been a crucial. That's all the stuff that we heard when I was an ambassador, when I was foreign minister. The U.S. ambassadors, rule of law. I mean, free and fair elections. That's what we need. I mean, it's not just Estonia. I mean, everybody got that same lecture.
Sure.
For years, and so we said, good idea.
Right. Seems to work well for you. Let's go. Right.
Right. And so now we have, my country, I look, it's one of the most open, liberal, democratic societies. Again, I have to keep saying to American audience, when I say liberal, I do not mean, left or anything. It's liberal meaning sort of open.
You won't be thrown in jail for what you say.
Right.
Right.
So now it's kind of harsh to look at this. I mean, why would you befriend like nasty people like Putin? The war in Ukraine is clearly a violation of that most basic tenet that has kept the world, kind of at peace since 1945, that you don't invade countries. In 1990, the United States, with the UN mandate, invaded Kuwait, which had just been invaded. Invaded Kuwait, liberated Kuwait because Saddam Hussein had invaded a country, and the U.S. said, "No, you don't. We do not invade countries."
Right, and it's not as if Kuwait was a NATO member. This was just
right.
Yeah, just. I mean, they had economic interest there, but that's right. So on the broad principle that you don't invade other countries was something that the U.S. was prepared to enforce.
Right. So all of that seems kind of odd these days.
Yeah. And for you, does the friendly behavior toward Putin? You're just someone who's observed. You've lived right on the edge of that.
Right. Well, we don't. I mean,
Russia all this time. What does it look like to you? The new weird friendly relationship that we seem to have with Russia.
Well, I guess I'd say the feeling is that when it seems clear, especially if you look at like J.D. Vance's speech in Munich, attacking the Europeans and not saying a word about Ukraine, and some of the stuff that came out in the signal dialogue. It's like there's a real hatred of Europe, whereas kind of you believe everything that Putin says. I mean, that's what, Witkoff comes back and says, well, he said this, he's repeating absolute lies from
Like
Putin.
doing Putin's propaganda work
Right.
for him.
And
Right.
so we're kind of, well, I mean, we get nervous. And of course, coming from one of those countries that borders Russia and constantly having these, sort of ridiculous threats. I mean, coming from the Russian leadership against countries. Well, I mean, you know, Medvedev has basically threatened, all of Europe, and he did it again the other day. Sort of like, you know, how long do you think this is a fake thing that he's just doing it for? What is he doing it for? I remember once back when Russia was still considered democratic by the United States. I mentioned how these threats were coming from even Yeltsin. And he said, oh, he's just saying that for domestic consumption. I said, yeah, but Strobe. I mean, if you're doing it for domestic consumption, that means you're popular if you say you want to invade.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
maybe. I mean, he sort of said,
And we're seeing maybe those domestic politics. I mean, what is so extraordinary to me is to watch Putin, who clearly has had, has been riding this idea of, we're going to put Russia back on top, and we're under assault from our enemies, and we have to, that sort of jingoism is how he keeps things going domestically. I I I I see echoes of that kind of rhetoric in Trump, and I can't tell if it's just that he just likes Putin as a fellow imagined tough guy, or if there's real money being exchanged, or what it is, but it sure looks like a relationship in this that has some force behind it that I just don't, that
right.
seems more than just ideological to me.
Well, and it's a relationship that he doesn't have with the democracies in Europe. Anyone.
That's right. That's right.
The closest there is Giorgia Meloni, the
Yeah, in
prime
Italy,
minister of
right.
Italy. But even that, it's not a, it's
He's
a,
tariffing them too.
yeah.
That's right. That's right.
It's not a. Anyway, there's a big difference. I mean, Putin is
Yeah.
taken seriously. I mean, he says she, right? I mean, so she's powerful. It's like, yeah, well, that is true. He is powerful, but I don't know if you want to
Mm.
be. He rules China with an iron fist. Well,
Yeah, he
maybe
likes
if
he
he
likes
does.
these folks. He does. He likes a bully. So, last thing for you, you I saw just signed on to be part. Am I right about this? Part of Volt Europa.
Yeah.
American listeners won't know what this is, but as I understand it, this
Well,
is
no
a,
one knows what it is. It's a very small political movement um, that is extremely pro-European for pushing through some really radical reforms in Europe. But I guess the American audience is kind of like that. But it's
as an American, the way I read that is that you are putting a lot of thought into what is life like if Europe has to go it alone.
yes, I
Is
am.
is
That's
the vibe I
basically it
get from
comes.
you?
Basically it comes down to what do we need to do, and Europe has been complacent. Throughout my time as president, I was always pushing for increasing defense expenditures, and
Mm.
we're way. We in like 15 years ago, we were one of three countries that actually met the NATO goal of 2%. Now we're all much higher, but we are higher at least. But we have to do things on our own and not just sort of think the U.S. is there.
And you
Um,
were thinking that even before
yeah, well,
the Trump era.
I didn't think the U.S. would pull out of NATO. It hasn't done that yet either, but now it's a distinct possibility. But it was more like, well, if we want to, if we want to ensure that the United States remains interested in Europe, we have to do our share in this. And we didn't like the freeloading done by a number of countries to this day are freeloading. but there are big, whole other reforms that need to be undertaken in the European Union for it to be able to compete in this world. I mean, again, to come back to what we started with, Europe is a disaster when it comes to tech. Yeah, I mean, we are extremely advanced, but most of Europe is really way behind, and we don't have. I mean, and all my work was actually in the public sector, digitizing the public sector, and I mean, the difference is, I mean, to really circle around. When I was at Stanford, I wanted to. My younger daughter came out, and I wanted to register for her for high school. And so first, I had to get my electricity bill, and then I had to drive down to the school headquarters with all the vaccination certificates, my passports, my various documents that said I can.
In person with the paper.
Right, and then I went there first, and then you take a number, and then you wait until you're called. Then I put all the stuff there. The woman takes all the stuff, disappears for 15 minutes, where she's photocopying, my passport, document, vaccinations, all of that stuff. And then she comes back and hands me the stuff back, and then she starts writing, various things from the document, writing by hand into another form.
It sounds very Soviet, I have to say.
Well, I mean, this was the United States. This was the center of digital technological innovation in the world.
You're within 10 miles of Apple, Google, Facebook, the greatest tech giants ever.
Right. And this is the level of public services, which was probably the same as it was in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. And then in Estonia, I would have done none of that because, my daughter, she's. I mean,
it's all digitized.
It's all there. I mean, you don't have to do anything. You don't do nothing at all, right? And so, I mean, I'll give you another example. I mean, how people thought when we did this. One of the designers was this guy who had recently become a father, and it was a real mess because he had to, he had to go to the hospital, get something saying, the kid was born. Then he had to go to a population registry and get a number. Then he had to go to get a birth certificate. Then he had to go to the health insurance company because to get health insurance. Then he had to go to the local government because you have to register the child there. So he said, I'm never going to do that again. And so the way it works since 2001 is that if a child is born, the hospital asks the mother, what's the kid's name? Mother said, John. It's reported automatically to the population registry. It says, on this day, this child named John was born. Population registry assigns him your life. That ID is, and then the information is sent to the health insurance company, the birth certificate issuing place, the local government. It's all done.
Final thought from you here. Does Europe go it alone from here? Do you think that is the future? Are we going to be in a world where the United States is no longer the standard bearer?
I mean, Europe clearly does not want to go it alone. Europe wants a liberal democratic West, but without the heft of the United States, it's going to be tough going.
But do you think can we reverse the effects in 3 years?
Well,
has the promise been broken for all time?
Well, I think there's a lack of trust right now that was always there before.
Yeah.
But I would say people feel betrayed, and that we did all the things that you wanted us to do, or we agreed to do. And no one was forced to be a liberal democracy. There are plenty of countries that are not, but we all thought we were in this together, and suddenly we've become the enemy. where's this come from?
Right. Right.
So
Right.
I don't know. We'll see. I mean, it's a little more existential for us, people like me, actually. I mean, all across Eastern Europe who've, basically had the same experience
Hmm.
and had some of somewhat older ones who actually suffered badly, and then people who are younger. In many ways, I see them too beginning to take it all for granted.
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
mean, teaching a course at the National University, and and I look at teaching a course on how on Estonian foreign policy and how we got in the EU, and then I look at the class and I go, anyone here born before 2004? Out of like 25 kids, that's two hands. I said the rest of you were born in and have grown up here in Estonia as a citizen of the European Union and a member of NATO, which is, I mean, when I try to tell them what it was like, I mean, forget about talking about how bad the Soviet Union was. Trying to tell them about what I just told you now. It's like
Hmm.
the
That's right.
struggles we had in the 1990s to even be taken seriously.
Hmm. They can't even imagine it.
No.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well,
Toomas Ilves, former president of Estonia. Thanks for being here.
great. Thank you.
The Rip Current is produced and created by me, Jacob Ward. And if you liked this show and you want more content like this, go to theripcurrent.com, where I publish a weekly newsletter that covers these same sorts of stories of the big invisible forces that have us all in their grip. And if you want to really do me a favor, if you could go to where you have listened to this or watched it and like it, share it, or even better, review it. Holy cow, is that helpful? It's the best possible way for me to find a new audience. I really appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening.